left off last Sunday, if you remember, where Paul was in Athens, and he was waiting for Silas and Timothy, two members of his team, to finish up some checking up that they were doing on new believers in Thessalonica. And while Paul was in Athens, he's looking around and he just notices, oh my goodness, there's altars everywhere to gods that don't exist. But these people believe they exist, so they make these altars to them to sacrifice to them. And it's like it would be in India or Indonesia. And he even sees, remember this? He sees one altar and it simply says, to an unknown God. And these folks even made an altar to a God that, in case they missed one, here's this altar. And he cleverly announces, I just so happen to be the local authority on the very God right here that you don't know yet. And then he starts to share the gospel. And of course, as always, there's mixed responses. Some believed, some rejected. And then from Athens, Paul makes his way 50 miles to Corinth. And with a population historically of about 200,000, it was one of the greatest cities of that time. It was famous for several things. Its bronze and pottery works. It had athletics, famous, second to the Olympics back in the day. It was famous for its immorality. The city was practically under control of the temple of Aphrodite that towered over it from the hill that Corinth is right next to. And it had 1,000 prostitutes who would come down from the temple at sunset and apply their trade. So it promoted immorality in the name of religion. Think about that. And when Paul later wrote 2 letters to the Christians that eventually are made there in Corinth, he made a list of the wickedness of the city. Do you remember these familiar words from 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 11 to 9? Listen. And again, he's reminding these Christians in Corinth who are receiving his letter some things about their former life. He says, do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived. That's maybe a word for us this morning. Don't be deceived. He said, fornicators, idolaters, adulterers, prostitutes, sodomites, thieves, the greedy, drunkards, revilers, robbers. Now, he could have added to that list. This is a partial list. None of these will inherit the kingdom of God. And this is what some of you used to be. Used to be. But you were washed, you were sanctified, you were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and in the Spirit of our God. How many of you used to be one of them? Sometimes as Christians, we can still be one of them. It's not supposed to be that way. But known sin, willful sin, that's not allowed. So it's a reminder to all of us, check your personal life. Make the adjustments that you need to make. Don't be deceived. Now, out of all the places where Paul would live and work and even have some of the greatest success of his missionary work, it's here in Corinth. And we have in our Bibles today 2 powerful letters that Paul wrote to the church since leaving it. And there were philosophers and strange religions there in Corinth. We read in the opening of 1 Corinthians, his first letter to the Christians there, what he was thinking while he lived there. And he wrote this. He said, Christ sent me to proclaim the gospel and not with eloquent wisdom, so that the cross of Christ may not be emptied of its power. For the message about the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing. But to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. Paul also said this, when I came to you, I didn't come proclaiming the mystery of God to you in lofty words or wisdom. I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. Now, why does he say, I didn't come to you with lofty words, fancy speech? It's very interesting. We often think as Christians, we have to really spell things out really well before we share the gospel to somebody. Hang with me on this one. We think we need to just have maybe a very refined, very articulate, very persuasive explanation of the gospel. And then somebody will understand and go, wow, okay, I need to get saved. And they receive Jesus as Lord and Savior. Paul is saying, I purposely didn't go that route. I just talked about Jesus. I gave you Jesus, and then he died on the cross. And that itself, that news, as the Spirit of God, of course, accompanies that news, as it enters the ears of somebody and into the very heart and mind of that person, somebody's then convicted that this is the truest thing they've ever heard. And that is how he says, I know it's truly the power of the cross and of the Spirit of God that brings people to salvation. It's not because, hey, I knocked it out of the ballpark. I preached a real barn burner. Everybody was so impressed with what I said. No, he said, I just gave it as simple as I could. But you responded, which proved this is the real thing. You getting this? So stop holding back if you're holding back because you think, I just don't know. I don't have the words. I'm not really articulate. I don't, and all that stuff. The Apostle Paul, some of his greatest work in Corinth was simply because he came up to somebody. We saw it again. This is the greatest thing about, again, the Monteritas. We talk about them a lot. And as we're joining with them, that's really their thing. We've given testimony to it. We saw members of our own team bringing people to Jesus. You're fishing. I mean, it was amazing how many people responded. You heard Dave Julius talk about people. He just went out to our driver. He didn't even speak Spanish. Didn't need to. He had a little, the Bible, the Spanish Bible that he brought with him, and it has some information and gives it to them. He has enough for them to read, speaks enough Spanish for them to understand. I'm going to read this. And they read it, they're convicted, and then they pray to receive Christ. When's the last time that happened to you with somebody in the United States? I'm going to ask you a question. When's the last time you even tried? How many people are you presently sharing Christ with? How many? Do you keep a list? Do you even have one on the list? You have no list. Time for a list. Time for a list. We talk about this. Time's running out. Bait the hook. Let's go fishing. But it's this simple. I'll be redundant if I keep riding this, but we've seen it. I've seen it. You've seen it. I've been on an airplane with somebody. I might have 15 minutes with them, and I watch them say, I believe this. But I only had a few minutes with you. It's not about me. It's about the Spirit of God bringing the truth when they hear it. Is this true or not? Yeah. Jesus is God. He's God the Son. He came to earth. He dies on a cross. It covers all of your sins that you know in here. You know that you know. One day you're going to stand before God. Every human being knows that. Every human being knows they are not doing the list. They know they come up short. We all know we have sin in our lives. I don't care where you're from, what language you speak, what country you're in. You know it. And there's in your knower a day you're going to give an account. And you simply bring this news, and it's amazing how people listen to it. And all of a sudden they believe it. Now there's some folks, they're going to fight you on it. It's not because the cross doesn't have power or the Holy Spirit isn't working. It's because somebody can be very stubborn. Well, you pray for them. Keep working as long as you can. But you get the idea here? Verse 1. And now we're just at verse 1. After this, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth. So here we are now, we're in Corinth. There he found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had ordered all the Jews to leave Rome, and Paul went to see them. So it's 49 AD that the Roman emperor Claudius banishes Jews from Rome. And Aquila and Priscilla were two of these Jews that fled as far as Corinth. And somehow Paul finds out about them and connects with them. Now, we don't know if they were followers of Jesus at the time that they met Paul, but either way, from here on out, they're mentioned several times in the New Testament as powerful partnership in the gospel, as a husband and wife team. And if you're a husband and wife, listen, be encouraged with these folks. They later go with Paul to serve in Ephesus, where they teach a passionate preacher by the name of Apollos to be a little more accurate in some of his theology. We're going to meet him next week. And in 1 Corinthians 16, we find out they pastored a church in their home in Ephesus. In Romans 16, we read that this couple risked their lives for Paul and working with Paul. I mean, these folks were all in. It's just great. Verse 3. And because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them, and they worked together. By trade, they were tent makers. Every Sabbath, Paul would argue in the synagogue and would try to convince the Jews and Greeks. When Silas and Timothy arrived from Macedonia, Paul was occupied then full time with proclaiming the word, testifying to the Jews that the Messiah was Jesus. So simply put, Paul ends up staying with Aquila and Priscilla while establishing the church in Corinth. I think Aquila and Priscilla's home was like the first Christian bed and breakfast. You know? So Paul stays with this couple, and we see in verse 3, they're of the same trade. And it was common in the Middle East that the shop would be downstairs and living quarters upstairs. And you could imagine how it's just like God to provide Paul with a place to stay with another guy who is of this very same trade as Paul, who would, let's say, share his tools, his job orders with Paul so that Paul can make some much needed income. Now, it's customary for Jewish fathers to teach their sons a trade. And we can assume then that Paul's father was a tent maker. And tent makers, historically, they worked with sackcloth and leather. It's about all we know. In 1 Corinthians 9, verse 18, Paul reminded the Christians in Corinth that he worked with his own hands while he lived there so he could make the gospel be as it was, free of charge. Because it's free, right? What's it cost you to get saved? How much do you got? I mean, do you got the money? What is it? I mean, imagine if there was a price tag to it. Well, the price was the Son of God's being tortured and death on a cross. That was the price. And he paid the price. You know, that was a concern for us down in Honduras, that people would not think that we were there, preaching for money. Because that's why Paul said, he's telling them, he says, I came free of charge. I supported myself, self-supporting work, so that I wouldn't ask you to support me. Otherwise, you might think, he's a charlatan. What's he doing here? He's just trying to make money off this thing. Okay, offering me eternal life for a little cash. You can understand, there could be some misunderstandings there, huh? There was a local church that we worked with in Honduras, and it took up an offering from the fairly, even very poor people that were there during the crusade, and World Mission Outreach was not the recipient of the offering, but the church was. But my main concern after seeing it was that people who came to the crusade might get the wrong idea about us. Salvation is free. World Mission Outreach was not there to take what little money they had. But you understand, it's a sensitive subject. Back to Paul. Paul recognized that his situation was unique because earlier in the same chapter, 1 Corinthians 9, Paul wrote that the Lord commanded that those who proclaim the gospel should get their living by the gospel. I want to thank you. You're my paycheck. Thank you. If I haven't thanked you lately, and I don't think I have, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm indebted to you. I'm grateful. Thanks for taking care of me. This was what he did often in the early days of his ministry. He didn't want to burden anybody. And he didn't want to have the appearance of a leech. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 9, he wrote, you remember our labor and our toil, brothers. We worked night and day so that we might not burden any of you while we proclaim to you the gospel of God. Love it. 2 Corinthians 11, Paul wrote, I proclaimed God's good news to you free of charge. And also in verse 9, he says, I didn't burden anyone because my needs were supplied by the brothers. And he's apparently referring to Silas and Timothy when they finally showed up with some financial aid. And that's what we just read in chapter 18, verse 5 of Acts. And so it appears that, it allowed him to be occupied then full time with evangelism because some additional funds came in. That's great. Thank you for allowing me to work full time for the Lord and for you and alongside of you. Now, I believe the Lord would have each of us consider this morning that unlike unbelievers in the workplace who see their jobs as funding their lifestyle or their retirement, providing for their families, your work funds your ministry, first and foremost, to your family, and then for your opportunity to share the gospel to those that you come in contact with. God knows you got to make a living, right? And so he has arranged in such a way that where you work is also where you minister. And what you earn enables you to stay in that place of ministry. You catching this? He couldn't have made your call to ministry any easier. He dovetailed your livelihood with your mission field. When you go off to work, you get to say to yourself, I'm a self-supported missionary like Paul. Or is there a better way to look at your work situation? Do you even look at your work situation like, I'm his ambassador, and I have these unbelievers around me? And I'm going to ask you again, when's the last time you shared Jesus with them? Some of you hate your job. Maybe you need to look at it differently. Daughter Casey sent me a little text thing yesterday. It's one of those things that just kind of everybody sends each other, little cute things we send each other on text. And it said, my boss told me to have a good day, so I went home. It's pretty good. So even if you don't like your job, I want you to remember it's your present mission field. And I mean that. I know Christians say this kind of thing, right? Don't we? Oh, we say this kind of thing. We say, when you leave here, you're now entering the mission field. But that's true. And you only got it until your last breath. And then you're off the mission field. You go on furlough forever. Come on. And we got to get busy. And I appreciate it. The church is getting busier. I'm thrilled about this. Things are happening here. So if you don't like your job, it's your field. And you may be stuck in it until you finish fishing in that pond. You might be praying for a new job. And Jesus might be interceding that you represent him because there's people who need to know him and change their eternal destination before he'd ever think of removing you and sending you somewhere else. Back to the chapter. Paul started the way he always does, and that's with the Jews at a local synagogue, and he was at it again, attempting to prove to the Jews that Jesus was the Messiah, that the scriptures had been foretelling for centuries who would come. Verse 6, it says, when they opposed and reviled him, in protest, he shook the dust off his clothes and said to them, your blood be on your own heads. I'm innocent. From now on, I'm going to the Gentiles. Now, we're not told what it was about Jesus that left the Jews in this state of unbelief. Did they discount Jesus on his background, his appearance, his heritage, his upbringing? Who knows? Have you ever made that mistake with somebody? I'm sure you did. And the Jewish leaders, they could have quoted entire books of the Old Testament verbatim, but they couldn't connect what they studied and waited for year after year with the life of Jesus that they were hearing from Paul, especially when it comes to his death and resurrection. I'm sure they had a hard time believing in the resurrection of Jesus, wouldn't you? If you'd never seen it before, if Jesus had never lived on the earth, you'd probably have a hard time thinking about it. You almost can cut these Jews a little slack. Because that's kind of hard to believe in something you've never seen. Yet back in the 13th chapter of Acts, Paul pointed to the fact that the general unbelief of the Jewish people was just another fulfillment of Scripture, that they were actually following a script that God had written for them to act out. And it was unavoidable. Very interesting. And it's how God would then expand his invitation for salvation to the entire world. And that they had opposed and reviled Paul in verse 6. It infers that they were combative. They were insulting to him. And in response, Paul shakes the dust from his clothes, shaking the dust off your clothes or off your shoes, as Jesus told his disciples to do when, their message wasn't welcomed, was a statement. It was like wiping off somebody's handshake or wiping their kiss off your cheek. Still in verse 6, Paul said, your blood be on your own heads. I'm innocent. From now on, I'm going to the Gentiles. In other words, Paul said, forget you. You had your opportunity. I'm bringing this message to people who you don't even like. And to have blood on your hands is understood biblically that you bear responsibility for somebody else's death because you were not faithful to warn them. That image came from the watchman of the city who stood upon the walls, whose tasks it was to stay alert and then warn the people of coming danger, but to have blood on your own head, as Paul said, means that you are to blame for your own judgment. You have the opportunity to be saved, but you turned it down. Now, when Paul said, from now on, I'm going to the Gentiles, he said that in the heat of the moment, because in the very next chapter, he's back in a synagogue. He's speaking and arguing that Jesus is the Messiah. You ever make a promise that you didn't keep? I'm never going to do this again, and then you do it. I get the image in my mind of Paul storming out as he says this. From now on, I'm going to the Gentiles. Now, how far away did Paul have to go to reach then the Gentiles? Verse 7, then he left the synagogue. He went out of that house, and he went to the house of a man named Titus Justus, a worshiper of God. His house was next door to the synagogue. The nearest Gentile was next door. That's kind of funny. I mean, I see him, he storms out one door, walks 10 feet. Where's the Gentile? I need a Gentile. Walks in the next door. And there's the Gentile. Verse 8. Crispus, the official of the synagogue, became a believer in the Lord, together with his household. Many of the Corinthians who heard Paul became believers and were baptized. So, Paul started a preaching station next door to the synagogue. That's called an in-your-face church plant. Right? Talk about competition. I love this guy. Okay? And not only that, but in time, Crispus, the ruler of the synagogue, as Paul's next door, maybe he's listening through the wall, he becomes a believer. And his whole family does. And then many Gentiles, these folks in Corinth, become Christians too. And you can feel the tension. And Crispus was replaced by a man named Sosthenes. And you'll want to remember that. But you read in verse 8 that many Corinthians became believers. Simply means it's taking off. Verse 9, one night the Lord said to Paul in a vision, do not be afraid, but speak, and do not be silent, for I am with you, and no one will lay a hand on you to harm you. For there are many in this city who are my people. So what Jesus said gives us some insight into something Paul is feeling at one point while he's in Corinth. When Jesus says, do not be afraid, but speak, don't be silent, Jesus wouldn't have told Paul that unless Paul hadn't been feeling some sort of fear and maybe considering toning his preaching down, most probably in fear of more conflict. Whatever the reason at this point, Paul's discouraged. You been there? I want you to remember, Paul's already been beat up. He's been stoned to death. He's had thugs chase him around through Thessalonica and Berea. And I wouldn't be surprised if the synagogue next door was threatening him regularly, maybe to hurt him, maybe to kill him. And what Paul needed was a fresh encounter with Jesus. And don't we all need that at times? Jesus said, do not be afraid, but speak, do not be silent. I am with you, for fear not, for I am with you. How often does that show up in the scriptures? That's what God said to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, to Jehoshaphat, Daniel, Mary, Peter, to the disciples when they were scared to death in the middle of the night in the lake. Jesus said, fear not, for it is I. One of the most significant names of Jesus is Emmanuel, God with us. And what did he tell his disciples before he left earth? He said, I'm going to be with you until the end of the age. He's always with you. But sometimes we just need to hear him say it again. Do you need that this morning? I know some of you, I know the stats. In a room this size, there's a good number of you who are seeing everything from, it's hopeless set of peepers. You're trying to hold it all inside to keep from a total breakdown. I get it. I've been there. And you want to know who empathizes with you. You're waiting for something, and maybe no person is able to give you what you need right now. And so that's why you feel very much alone in your fears and your angst. Maybe just eat you up. You're getting an ulcer over it. You're waiting. You're waiting for something. You're waiting for encouragement. You're waiting for an answer. You're waiting for something. And I want to remind you that Jesus he was waiting for the Jewish nation to respond. And now he's still waiting for the planet to respond, but he is rejected, and Jesus is ignored, and nobody returns his texts. He knows what it's like to be rejected, to feel alone, and so he tells Paul, and he's telling you right now, do not be afraid about your future, about your deepest hopes not coming true, about those who are threatening to undo us right now in the nation. Why? Because he is with you. You are not alone or without the best friend imaginable. When you have the all-powerful Heavenly Father who is with you, you truly do have the greatest friend, greatest power available. But why is it that we still feel so alone? I think here's a game changer. What you do while you're discouraged, I would encourage you, what you should do is share Jesus with people. You start sharing Jesus, and your personal disappointments begin to shrink. As you begin to watch people respond to your Jesus, and their lives begin to change. You know what they say, the best way to get out of depression is to simply start serving other people. It helps bring you out of your little universe. Anybody get stuck in your own little universe? I know that one. I had some years where I was stuck in that. And I had some terrible depression and some anxiety. It was terrible. And things were just gray, and I couldn't see the future, and I was very concerned. And I was praying, and I remember a stint, believe it or not, for about 4 years, I felt like I was praying to God, but it was just iron ceiling above me, and my prayers weren't getting through. And I swear, I would tell you, because I believed it, God is not listening to me. He is done with me. And I said, yeah, but and I was a pastor at the time. My job is to tell people it's always open. God is always listening. He's always there. You never have to give up hope. He always will come through. He's listening. I didn't believe it myself, but I was teaching it. Was I a hypocrite? I tell you, I was holding on to something, a belief that even though at the time I felt like, I felt God was not with me. He was sick of me. He said, I got to move to somebody else because you're whatever. My thoughts in my head. Anybody? Am I alone in this room? Okay, and it was rough. And I had to really dig deep and kind of find out what I was made out of. And I thought, how much do I really believe this? And I don't want to preach this because I need a paycheck. And because I got wife and kids, depending on dad to make a living. I had to really think, okay, God, believe it or not, I was thinking this way. God, I believe you're real. I'm not doubting that. I know you're there. I know you love people. I know you died for everybody, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm going to tell people that because at least there's hope for them. I literally felt there's no hope for me, but for them there is. And because there is for them, I'm going to give it my best. I'm going to pitch it as best as I can. Do you ever do that? Do you ever try to encourage people in Jesus when you yourself are incredibly discouraged? And somehow, actually, that's what kept me going. And so it kind of eventually brings you out of your own little universe is when you hear somebody else's story, they come to you, Pastor, can I share something with you? And then I'm hearing their story. And what do I do? Based on what I'm thinking about myself, do I transfer that now onto them? Do I say, based on what I'm experiencing personally right now, it's hopeless to you. It's hopeless. I'm just telling you by personal experience, God ain't listening, so you might as well don't. And then I learned some things. I don't want to camp out here much longer on this moment. But you know what? At one point, I remember having to take a lot of naps. I remember just being literally exhausted. Anybody ever have depression? And literally you're bone tired, and you almost want to sleep and make everything go away, and you're literally exhausted. And I fought this, and it was 4 years. Is it okay? I have no problem being vulnerable with you. You may have an issue allowing me to be vulnerable. You may not want to hear this from a pastor. Some people literally they can't handle it. He's human? He had depression? Anxiety? Oh yeah. It's terrible. It's terrible. And and don't also rule out that there is attack on you. And if God calls you, the devil's on your heels too. So, at one point, I swear, and again, I can only count on one hand, I think, the times I actually feel like I heard the audible voice of Jesus. I can't claim a whole lot of that. Impressions on my mind, I think God's saying something. But I mean, like, I heard a voice. I swear I heard Jesus repeat something to me that he said, thank you. You remember the story, the paralytic at that pool of Bethesda, where he comes to me, he says, "Do you want to be made well?" That's a yes/no question. And the man responds with an excuse. "Well, I don't have anybody to throw me into the pool when it stirs up," and all. If you know the history behind that story. Jesus goes, "No, that's not what I asked you. Do you want to be made well?" It's a yes or no question. Do you? And he doesn't even wait for the man to answer. But Jesus then says, "Get up, make your bed, walk it out of here." And I swear I heard the Lord say to me, "Do you want to be made well?" I said, "Oh, Jesus. Yeah. You know, I'm tired of the sadness, the depression, the gray. Feel like I'm living, two lives. Yeah." I said, "Okay." I said, "Get up, make your bed." And I was taking a nap at the time. I got out of bed and something happened. I literally, threw the covers back over it, arranged it, and I said to myself, "I'm never going back. I'm not going back there." Yeah. And maybe that's for somebody here, or more than one of you, I'm sure. He's asking you, do you want to be made well? Well, make your bed. Get out of your bed, make it. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. There's work to do. And I think he's waiting. I'm sure at this point in your life, he's proved himself so many times already. You know how many times he had already proved himself to me? You'd think I would have remembered. You know how many times he had already done things, used me, whatever, worked in my life, just did things, forgiven me, all that. You'd think I would have remembered that. But when there's an attack on you, and when things just take you by surprise, and just you all of a sudden find yourself in just a rough environment, I think the enemy helps in this. It causes you, and you somehow, mysteriously, forget all the things he's already done. You understand why the Jews, after the plagues of Egypt, the parting of the Red Sea, it's only 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, they're at the gate of the Promised Land. It takes them 2 weeks. Talk about short-term memory loss. What God had just done, the miracles and all that, all of a sudden, the 12 spies go in, 10 come out saying, it's too much. These guys are too big to handle, etc. Wait. He just drowned Pharaoh and the whole army 2 weeks ago in front of your eyes. I got some sympathy for the Jewish nation. I get it. Do you get it? every once in a while, the Lord has to just step in and tell us that we're not going to face more than we can bear, even though we swear it's too much. I can't do another day of this. I can't keep going, right? And maybe some of us need to hear that right about now as things in America and the planet keep deteriorating. And we haven't seen nothing yet. And when what we are facing appears more than we can bear, we have got to remember that when God gives a man or a woman a task to do, he also gives you the power to do it. And the power is the very presence of God himself. I am with you. I am with you. What did Paul need to hear? What do you need to hear? And he says it to deaf ears all the time because we're busy going, I can't handle it. But I am with you. Yeah, but I just can't handle it. I'm right here. I'm with you. And when you understand who he is and all the power God's got, think of everything he's done. All that God is, how do you even describe everything that God is? And God is saying all of that you know in your limited capacity at this moment is with you. I'm with you. Not only that, I'm in you. If you're a Christian, you have God's Spirit in you. What sadness should override that? What disappointment? What fear? What issue? What threat? I mean, we live as if there's no God. The world is going to really want to see people in whom the Spirit of God is. I want to tell you again, the whole idea is that when the world is falling apart, if Jesus is in you, you're not falling apart. People will see that. And they're going to want to hang on to that. They're going to want to have what you have. Come on, you with me? There was never an easy place to serve God for Paul. And perhaps it's possible that if you're in an easy place, something's wrong. Paul reminded Timothy, yes, all who desire to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution. 2 Timothy 3:12. Francis Bacon, he wrote that prosperity is the blessing of the Old Testament and adversity is the blessing of the New. Right? Adversity is the blessing of the prosperity is the blessing of the Old Testament. Adversity is the blessing of the New. And there is a blessing in adversity, isn't there? I think, the truth be told, I'd rather have adversity than prosperity. One makes me hang on to God a little more than the other. Some of us need to stop praying for prosperity. God, don't let me lose my money when the cryptocurrency thing happens and the UBI and the Russia cyber attacks and the banks go ahead and confiscate my money, which is probably coming in 3 weeks, says Mike. Oh, you never know what's coming, folks. Let's say all of our money disappears. In a day where there's all this internet cyber stuff, it's amazing. Somebody somewhere on the other side of the planet, in a basement with a computer and a button, who knows what they're going to do. And let's say somehow your money's vacuumed out. Then what? Oh, no! Now what? Now what? I am with you. God is with you, and we got each other. And you'll find out that, you know what? God didn't put us on the planet to be wealthy enough to always feel comfortable and safe. And then actually we start to live a life like the folks that we actually saw in, Central America. And if you've gone to other poor countries, it's amazing what a human being could get by on. And it's amazing how much happier they really are. And that's not an overstatement. Let's go get Putin's yacht. That'll be the new Mayflower for a landmark. I like it. Come on, we can do that. We'll live off of fish. I think chances are Paul, strangely, it's amazing what you see here, that Jesus has to show up to Paul. Hey, don't be discouraged, buddy. I'm with you. That's amazing. Don't be scared. Paul? Wait, people come to Christ? And you know what it's like. Things could actually be kind of good, and out of nowhere, you get hammered by something. That's called spiritual warfare. Don't forget, you are in a world at war. So I'm thinking Paul was probably experienced that Elijah syndrome. Remember that when Elijah, the prophet, back, you read about him in 1 Kings, right? Where he says, I alone am left. It's just me. Nobody else is following God. It's just me against the priests of Baal. And then God says, no, buddy, listen, I got 7,000 you don't know about. They have not bowed their knee to Baal. You're not alone. And you see, I think, that very same thing where Jesus just said to Paul, nobody's going to lay a hand on you or harm you. There are many who are in the city who are my people. Jesus is God, and he's saying the same thing he said to Elijah centuries earlier. So I'm simply saying that a renewed calling, a renewed visit, of Jesus is going to help replace that fear. That renewed courage is going to replace that caution that you may have about going forward. Paul, the great apostle Paul, was at one point being cautious, entertaining being cautious. But, with a fresh visit from Jesus, he's able to stay it out in Corinth. And as we read in verse 11, it's for another year and a half. Watch this, verse 11. Almost done here, everybody. You're not worried? Okay. Well, I got a big clock on the back wall. So it's kind of that. So sometimes people take it away. Okay. He stayed there a year and 6 months, teaching the word of God among them. But when Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews made a united attack on Paul and brought him before the tribunal. They said, this man is persuading people to worship God in ways that are contrary to the law. Just as Paul was about to speak, Gallio said to the Jews, if it were a matter of a crime or serious villainy, it's very interesting. This almost kind of sounds like what happened with Jesus when he was on trial. I would be justified in accepting the complaint of you Jews, but since it is a matter of questions about words and names and your own law, see to it yourselves. I do not wish to be a judge in these matters. And he dismissed them from the tribunal. In other words, there were people that wanted the courts to declare Christianity illegal. Does that sound familiar? Did you hear me? There were people that wanted the courts to declare Christianity illegal. That's what it was. That's what's going on in our day. The courts are the very things used today by the godless liberals to remove the Christian voice from public, and they are furiously working to make the proclamation of the gospel illegal, just as it is in many countries in the world today. This Roman official, Gallio, mentioned here, he was famous for his kindness. You might know the name Seneca. Remember Seneca? Renowned philosopher of the day. He said about his brother Gallio, because Gallio's his brother, Seneca's brother. He said this, even those who love my brother Gallio to the utmost of their power do not love him enough. He said, no man was ever as so sweet to one as Gallio is to all. The Jews tried to take advantage of Gallio. But Gallio was an impartial Roman, and he didn't want to hear Paul's defense. In fact, Luke implies that he cuts him off right as he's about to speak. And Gallio does the opposite that the Jews request. He makes it very clear that Rome's not going to get involved in religious disputes. Wouldn't it be nice if the Supreme Court and other courts in the land would not get involved in your faith and in the practice of your faith and the free expression of your faith? And Jesus kept his word, didn't he? Remember, Jesus said, don't worry, buddy. Don't fear. Nobody's going to lay a hand on you. And nobody did. Pretty nice. Jesus knew before Paul did, you got to be drugged before a court. That kind of makes you nervous. You go to court. So the Jews, it's interesting. They got all this frustration, and they want to take it out on somebody. And so they make the ruler of their own synagogue, the guy that, remember, replaced Crispus, they make the guy their punching bag. Verse 17. Then all of them see Sosthenes, who's just standing right there, right? Gallio just said, this is your own deal, I'm not going to hear it. And they, we want to beat up somebody. And so they take their own leader. Explain this. They take Sosthenes and says, He's the official of the synagogue, and they beat him in front of the tribunal. But Gallio paid no attention to any of these things. Nice, loving, kind Gallio. He's like forbidden from now having empathy for this guy. Sosthenes is the man who replaced Crispus when Crispus became a follower of Christ back in verse 8. Where was Gallio when Sosthenes needed him? I think the Lord allowed Sosthenes to get beat up. Sometimes God allows you to get beat up. You know that? Because if Sosthenes is the same one who Paul mentions in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 1, when he says who's writing the letter, when he says this, 1 Corinthians 1:1, Paul, called to be an apostle of Christ Jesus by the will of God, and our brother Sosthenes. Well, we could pretty much be sure this is the same guy who defected after they beat him up. His own people beat him up. And you imagine him going, I hang with you. I'm going to hang with Paul. And he joins Paul sometimes after the incident. And he's with Paul when Paul pens his first letter to this very group of Christians in Corinth. First part of chapter 18. We'll finish it up next Sunday. What do you think? Anybody feel a little more encouraged today? Things a little less dark? Okay? A little less gray? Have a little more hope in Jesus? If so, I've done my job. Anybody have a heavier burden to share Christ? It's a wonderful burden. If so, I've done my job. Okay, and you're not alone. You're not alone. Anything on anybody's heart? How you doing? Okay. So I'm going to assume there's some surgery going on. Maybe the Lord's doing something right now. Let him do it. He's really good at open heart surgery, you know. Just lay yourself out on the table and just let him take the scalpel and open you up. And let him do the work, whatever he needs to do on you. Maybe right now you talk to your Father. Thank him for his love for you, his care for you. Recognize all that God is as far as you can even understand. And you and I know so little of everything there is to know about God. It'll take forever. It'll take all eternity to understand who our God is. But what you know is enough to go on. Thank him for that. Thank him for whatever he's been doing in your mind, your heart today. Whatever refining, refocusing he's been doing. Thank him for it. Thank him that he sent you the Messiah, God the Son, Jesus. And he is with you just the same way he was with Paul. There's no difference. Just as ready, just as powerful to walk you through whatever you're going through now. Paul's Jesus is your Jesus. Thank him for that. Thank you. Thank you, Father, that Paul's Jesus is my Jesus. And thank him for whatever refining he's done with you in your workplace, how you may see it. Whatever else he may have customized in your mind today, thank him for it. And I encourage you to write things down. If he has spoken to you today, write it down. When the God of the universe says something to you, it's good that you write it down so you don't forget. So when I say amen, grab a pen, grab something to write on if there's something you need to remember so that you don't forget. Marching orders, a truth, whatever it is. Amen.